Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive!
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I will be joined by Julian Darius. Now we're getting to the very far end of our journey. We're now getting to Season 11. Season 10, Series 10, I should say, was a little bit uneven, a bit wonky, didn't light our fire. But yet we're going to jump into Series 11 now. Is it a step up? Are we going to love it? You'll now find out as I hand over to me and Julian. And it would take another 4 years before we would get another series. So it took 2016. So you've got another 4 years of inter-season stories, whatever that happened between these stories, before we get series 11. And again, we get sort of a quite, to me at least, a bit of a mixed bag of episodes. But before I say, I'll ask you. But what are your thoughts? What are your take? Because this is the first time you've seen this series, isn't it? So series 11, this is the first time you've seen this. So before I sort of comment, what are your thoughts, or what were your thoughts of watching series 11?
I think that overall, I would say something very similar to 10. I would say there is repetition. There are episodes that I think are, I see what they're doing that's different, but there's a lot of repetition. I don't know that I hate any episode. I mean, they're, sort of mixed bag. However, I think I like 11 a lot better than 10. And, as we get to it, there are at least, a couple episodes that I really love. That was not true of the previous season. So that makes it much more successful for me. And even like the finale focused on Kat. I don't think it's a great episode, but I kind of admire that. But I think that, give and take with the droids and the kidney, I kind of love. And Crisis with Crichton, the fifth episode, I just adore.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on 11?
No, I agree totally. I think the thing is, I see where we sort of said, and this, I'm glad you said this, because where I felt the repetition in Series 10, but felt that they weren't hitting the mark or doing anything too different, I feel with this, like there's a lot of repetition. Like I could name, in fact, they even bloody quote it. I mean, it's talking like Samsara. They mention the Justice Field. Like they literally tell you, we're talking about Series 4 now. But the things they do in this series are better, or at least more interesting, and they feel fresher. And so it feels like a better series to me. Officer Rimmer very much ends up almost being a sort of a me squared kind of pastiche, or Rimmer World pastiche. It's that thing again.
Yeah.
Samsara is obviously you get that sort of thing of the Justice Field and all this other stuff, and Twentica, that they've been back in time and done this thing plenty of times, but I'm actually. This feels more akin to what has come before in a much, much better way. And I'm feeling that spark more in this series than I definitely did in Series 10.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And, and I think that, even Crisis is sort of, that's the Ace Rimmer for Crichton. It's just, introducing Ace Rimmer. But it works. And I think that, I am not in love with Twentica or Samsara. or some of the others, but there's certainly solid episodes. And, I don't know. I mean, there's something in them that, I'll like,
Mm.
that I'll think, yeah, okay. I don't know. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about an average. And for me, I think that I can forgive one of the things that I found, and we've talked about sort of like different ways of measuring how we feel about a movie or a season.
Mm.
I tend to be very moved by the heights, and I can kind of forgive a lot of ineptitude, or stuff that is repeating, or episodes that I think are kind of lackluster. Like, they're okay if there's something that I think, wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that way about about Crisis, and to a lesser extent about Give and Take.
Mm. No, I'd agree with that. I mean, to go through them, I I'd say every single one of these episodes has at least got an element I really enjoy, which I couldn't say about Series 10.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it could just be a silly joke or there's something in it, but there's something that stands out. I mean, Twentica. I mean, Twentica is that sort of like we've talked about how Red Dwarf is Star Trek. This is that
Mm-hmm.
sort of silly thing of the crew, whether it be Kirk or Picard or whatever, going back to 20th century Earth and having to dress as gangsters or whatever. Um, but I like some of the stuff in this. Like, it's again the reasoning behind it is, if anything, it's basically isn't this Star Trek Insurrection?
I think it's Star Trek First Contact, right?
First
Like
Contact. There you go. Yeah,
they're totally the
yeah,
Borg. They even have Borg names,
yeah,
like 3 of 63. Yeah.
I was so watching this and thinking like, this is a total rip on Star Trek. Like, if ever,
Oh yeah.
if Patrick Stewart was feeling this in 1989, like, he should really be feeling it now. But I love the joke of some of the things. Like, there's one joke where you got the lead Borg, let's call him that, and he says, I'm not that, don't consider me to be 3 of 63, to really sort of like denigrate something. And then
Mhm.
later in the episode, he's there with 3 of 63. So, and they're like, he was really slagging you off before. And he's like, no, ignore them, don't talk to them. He's like, no. I want to hear this. He's like, well, we were going through a bad patch at the time, and like that to me, it's silly, but it's sort of I kind of like. I like the actor as well, who plays the sort of the replicant Borg, whatever it is. I'm going to name check him because he is he's one of these actors that sort of is a British comedian, British comedy actor, sort of pops up in lots of things. I'm going to find it. We go. Kevin Eldon, and he's just got such a great voice, and he can play creepy so well. He's been in some things, and I always enjoy him when I see him in things. I don't know if you've seen um, what came after. I'm thinking Shaun of the Dead and
Mm.
what was the cop one? Hot Fuzz.
Hot Fuzz. Yeah.
He's in Hot Fuzz and he's great in that. So he's always good. But yeah, I like the Borg in this, and also the sort of the daftness of because obviously it's 20th century America. They try to go about that when they're trying to get into the sort of the speakeasy.
Mm-hmm.
And Rimmer sort of like saying, well, they really like the British accent, and especially when you use the word "whom" and just start sort of spouting this terrible sort of English accent and stuff. It's like that stuff's all really good. Like, so yeah, I like the fact it's a pastiche of Star Trek First Contact, and I'm liking some of the characters. So to me, this is a much stronger opening episode than Trojan was, in the fact that this feels a bit more
Hmm.
irreverent and sort of silly, in the vein of sort of probably series 4 and 5 were. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts
I
on
think that's insightful.
20?
I don't know that I like it. You know, Better than the opener of 10. I don't know. There's stuff that I do like. I do like the sort of like riff on Star Trek First Contact. I mean, I like the Borg stuff with their names. I like how conscious it is of the fact that it's repeating itself and ripping off this other stuff. Um,
Hmm.
by far, the funniest moment for me is Crichton saying, yes, the Sims are so ruthless, they'll stoop to the most hackneyed of cliches.
Oh yes, yeah.
The show is just total. I mean, at this point, they're so conscious of influence and repetition that
Mm.
that it becomes, it's like, well, how dare those Sims use this technique, stoop to this technique? We've all seen this before, and they should know it. There's almost this kind of like winking at the viewer in a way that I really like there.
Yeah, because even when they do come back, when they've travelled back in time, there is that moment of what is it? We sort of does he says, so we meet again. And he's like, you really don't mind, but a cliche, do you?
Yeah, right.
So they do. They hammer that home quite a bit, which I do find funny. So yeah, again, they've got this idea of the speakeasy not being, the fact it's looking at science and because when they go back in time, they're trying to eradicate technology. So the speakeasy is all about. When they're there, they can talk science and do experiments and this other stuff. And the actress who plays the sort of the flapper, or whatever you call it, her little monologue she does, it's really quite impressive to get through some of that dialogue in the way she does. So all of it's all a bit silly. It's all very sort of you can think of every other time that they've gone back to Earth in some way. But I find it fun. I mean, again, there are the things of, is this actually Earth's, as in listed as Earth's history? Because if it is, that means that at some point in the 20s they were taken over by robots, and a massive EMP pulse took them out and returned them back to the Stone Age, sort of thing. So,
yeah, I was confused by that. I mean, so do they? I mean, so remember, there's that. What is the episode where they get the dimension jump? The Holly Hop Drive, and they say, "Oh yeah, we're still out." 3 million years from Earth.
Yeah.
There's like a planet that they're getting near, and then the Borg substitutes, go back in time, and they sort of ride the time wave back. Earth's not there. So what planet is this? We're supposed to believe it's Earth, but right. I don't know. It's that is strange.
Because the other thing is, they don't follow, because they sort of follow the time wave back, because they end up crash landing and stuff. They end up sort of being several years later. They lost some time. So the Borg have been there for a couple of years. When you get there, you find that sort of time has changed. So surely that should have had a fundamental difference on time. It's sort of getting to that thing of, even within this series, they will hit on time travel a couple of times. And I've got some, when we get to give and take, I've got some questions. But it's a fun episode. But like I say, when they leave and you see sort of this, because the other thing as well, you see them flying off into space. I can't remember the end. But do they go back through time?
Yeah, they say they're going to use that Kronos machine that they stole from the guy's wearing, as if it's a hip hop medallion or something.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't know.
But if they can travel in time, why not just travel? Why doesn't list it? Because at Earth, why doesn't he just travel forward to the moment he leaves Earth on Red Dwarf and say, "Oh, actually, I can continue my life on Earth in the future."
Yes, very good point. Also, like, remember the Holly Hop Drive, and the whole fighting your future selves who have been corrupted by time. I mean, now they have a working time machine. Not going to be mentioned again.
Yeah. All this stuff seems to be sort of stocking up. So they've still got a matter paddle somewhere. They've now got a time Kronos Drive. They've got.
It's all in
whatever's
cat's
happening
quarters. Cats just,
this is mine and that is mine. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Uh,
that kind of thing. I nitpick this episode. That kind of thing, like it bothers me in this episode. And I agree with you that it has more soul than
mm,
most of those season 10 episodes. You've convinced me of that. But there's this little stuff that bothers me. The time travel thing. How is this Earth when they're out there? That bothers
mm,
me. Then they land in a desert and then they're suddenly
yeah,
in a city. Where was that desert? Okay, I don't
yeah,
know. Um, then they watch a man get gunned down, and he's got a business card that leads them to the speakeasy. The cops are, the Borg uh, controlled cops are machine gunning people in the streets. Yet they leave this person on the sidewalk to talk with them without
yeah,
any
and
interruption. And usually, I mean, that's a cliche, but usually you would see, the officers run away in a semi convincing way, so you can elide it. Here, there's
mm.
nothing of that. I mean, at every step of the way, there's something like that kind of pulls me out of it a little.
I agree with that, and I think this is where I'll be honest on this rewatch of the show, all the way through, especially when they do these sort of time travel episodes. I get, and I don't want to use it as an excuse or a defense, but I get that this is a sitcom. This is a half-hour sitcom, but this, I honestly think that this. I mean, I love Red Dwarf. We've talked about that, but I still think this show could be better if it maintained a continuity and a fixed way of things happening, much like Star Trek. I mean, granted, there's
Mm-hmm.
probably some flexibility in that, but the fact that we can nitpick these things, and we should nitpick these things and point them out, sometimes irks me a little bit when I'm like, look, if you just maintain certain in-universe rules, I would be a lot happier. And maybe that's just sort of like that sort of like OCD nerddom that I've got. I don't know, but I think if they were to stick to their own rules, I think this whole thing would even be even better, and would probably be considered like it would
More of a
elevate it. I think,
masterpiece. Yeah.
yeah, it would have
Yeah.
a much wider audience. I think and appreciation.
Oh, I agree, and I think that the other thing about that, I mean, absolutely, and I keep talking about how I love the sci-fi ness of the show. I
Mm,
love this brilliant sci-fi plots, and yeah, not every plot needs to be a brilliant take on sci-fi, but the fact that it is a good science fiction show along with a good comedy is important to me,
mm,
and I think that you're completely right. And there have been many episodes that we've talked about where you have said, well, they didn't need to do this. Why don't they
mm.
just do it this way? And where you solve the problem in a very elegant way. And I think that shows that they could, there's nothing that's really being gained in most of these episodes by, not explaining something or not taking a sentence to say, oh yeah, we're moving to another location, or we just left Earth, conquered by the Borg for the
Yeah,
middle of the 20th century.
I think the problem comes from almost like the approach to this show. Um, they have, and I've used the reference before. They have almost like a Simpsons approach to this. And the reason that the Simpsons can work is because the characters are animated. They never age. You can access an episode and you can leave, and you can jump ahead 2 seasons and you can watch it and it's exactly the same. The
Mm-hmm.
animation might be slightly different, but that's it. And there's a reason for that. It's because that's how animated shows work. They can literally go for 30 years like the Simpsons do, or almost 20 years like Family Guy or whatever, and you can maintain that status quo. It's very, very, it's very rare in the history of the Simpsons they will bother, they will matter and change the status quo. Um, the problem with this show is they want to sort of do that, where it's sort of like every episode is an accessible episode. You can come in and you know the setup and you can move on and whatever. However, they also want to acknowledge the aging cast.
Right.
And so well, if you're going to do that and you're going to make these changes, then you've got to start changing people. I think although we sort of derided some of the stuff they did in sort of Series 7 and the sort of they fixed, I think, in Series 8 to a great extent, is they sort of acknowledged it. You know what? These guys have been trapped in space for years, and we need to sort of either shake things up or show some growth. Granted, it was pushed by Chris Barry wanting to leave the show at least, or at least do something different at Series 7, but
Mm-hmm.
him becoming Ace Rimmer, I was able, maybe sort of stretching things a bit, but I was able to show that growth of that character to some extent through sort of Series 6 into Series 7.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done it, they did other things, but then they sort of knock it on the head and go, no, we're back to The Simpsons again, and every episode's going to be the same thing. And it sort of works for the first 4 or 5 series. And then you've got to acknowledge that, all right, we've got to change things up, and we're going to now introduce Kachansky and da-da-da. I just feel they want their cake and eat it a little bit. And,
Yeah,
you said we both like... we both say how much we like Crisis, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the other thing is, I mean, so you're essentially talking about, the sort of like sitcom status quo, right? Which, The Simpsons can, kill off a character's wife, but it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, you're not going to be disturbed by continuity. And essentially Family Guy and other shows can do that too. I mean, but, in addition to the need to change things up, one of the things that I note is that, especially since about season 5, maybe season 6, the amount of continuity references is greater and greater, right? So, we're getting we get Polymorph 3 essentially this season. Well, yes, you don't have to have seen that stuff, but the whole feeding on emotion is barely referenced, and yet it's really important to the plot. So if you haven't seen the original, you're kind of lost. I mean, we're going into Samsara. Samsara, says, "Oh, it's a reverse justice." That's pretty, I mean, that's pretty important. I mean, there are all these references to earlier things and earlier adventures that maybe you could ignore, but I'm not so convinced. I mean, if you don't know the Despair Squid, are you going to really get the end of Back to Earth? So, I mean, you're right that there's a kind of return to status quo, but they also want to have more continuity and at least more referentiality. And so, it seems to me that, in addition to, that's another part of how they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. And I'm not sure that the key thing is letting characters evolve and necessarily like breaking the structure. Although I think we agree that they proved they could in Series 8 and that they could make it work, and we're both a fan of trying that. Having said that, I mean, I think that even if you return to the status quo, these changes, the constant changes to characters, not referencing the fact that, oh yeah, we've been back in time before, we've been back to Earth before. The constant changing to characters. I mean, you just can't have an episode that is all about a character learning a lesson and then have him learn the exact opposite lesson and then learn the first lesson again and then learn the first lesson a third time and then learn the opposite lesson a second time. At some point, that's going to be less satisfactory.
As we talk about it, it strikes me that this show, going to Dave, could have learned something from the success of New Doctor Who. And this may be controversial, but we've gone through this thing of the status quo, the sort of let's call them the Monster of the Week episodes, or the sort of the sci-fi gimmick of the week episode, or whatever. And then you get the sort of the continuity episodes. I say that sort of 7, 6 a little bit, but 7 and 8 to varying degrees of success definitely introduce a level of continuity and consequence that I find more interesting. And then I think, if you look at sort of like, old Doctor Who, I enjoy some classic Doctor Who, but the episodes are very much of a piece. You have a story, and then they'll have the next adventure, and the next adventure, and then they'll have the regeneration when the Doctor wants to leave or whatever. New Who wants to keep that continuity. Like, you can look now at Jodie Whittaker, and you can sort of trace things back to David Tennant or whatever. And I think that's great. I think this would have been an opportunity on a much smaller scale. If they'd have said, yeah, you've got 6 episodes, right, we are going to have, in some way, we are going to do 6 episodes. Here's the stuff we want to do. Bam, 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 bam. Here's the jokes we want to tell or the stories we want to tell. But I'm going to do an overarching thing. We've got an opportunity to do something different here, to try it to be a bit more experimental again. Let's try this thing. And I think it'd have had much more impact, and I think it would have probably been much more successful, because you could have had consistent characters and a stronger sort of oomph to the show. I just think it would have been. It was a missed opportunity. This feels like an 80s sitcom, and that's no detriment, because I love 80s sitcoms, but it feels like an 80s sitcom being produced in a world that has changed.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, because I don't think about how different the world of television was when these seasons were, airing versus the original. I mean, this is we're post Battlestar Galactica with its continuing narrative, which was very influential on the new Doctor Who, in terms of structure. Now, I'm not talking directly, but I mean, it seems to me that the way in which 7 and 8 were kind of looked down upon by fans has got to be key here. That, having been off the air for 10 years, the idea is, well, we sort of went off in this other direction. We need a return to form. If the show had been canceled at the end of, say, season 6 or season 5, if you had a 10-year gap after that, maybe then they would have come back and made some of these alterations and done a sort of continuing narrative. But it seems to me that, well, they did that in 8, essentially.
Yeah. Maybe, if it had stayed with the BBC, they'd have pushed for that, and they'd have probably, tried something different. I mean, there's a lot gone on. The whole crew are still, technically, the whole crew are still out there in the universe somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I understand why Dave have played it safe, why UK TV's played it safe, why they've gone for this format. It's just that, I don't know, there just seems to be, it's good. I don't know, we'll go through the rest of the episodes. I enjoy some of these episodes a great deal, but I don't know, it just feels like it's lacking something. It feels a bit inconsistent and a bit sort of scattershot at times, that I find sort of a little bit. It just irks me, as I've said. It vexes me. Yeah, it's just that nerddom gets sort of is unsatisfied.
Well, what do you think of Samsara, the second episode?
I do like Samsara, and again, I think this comes to I like the fact it references the justice field, because it's blatantly obvious that's sort of what it is. It's another sort of use of that technology. But again, I like this a bit like with when we talked about the beginning, the end of the last series. You get to see life on a ship. You get to see an active crew before it all goes pear shaped, and a relationship of 2 other people. So this idea that they go onto this ship and they scatter with bodies and all this other stuff, and they've all seem to have died in a horrible way, or during some sort of sex act is really funny, and yeah. I like some of the ideas of it, but I actually really like the idea of how it got there. Like, you get to see why. It's not just in the past we've sort of seen similar things, haven't we? We've gone to ships and found some sort of disfigured skeleton or some other mess up, and Crichton has basically spouted some exposition as to why it's likely to have happened. But with this, you get to see the reasons and the consequences of that, and I kind of like that. That to me, I enjoy.
Yeah, you're talking about that flashbacks are actually shown throughout the episode.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, Jim Green and Professor Rachel, Barker.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like that. I think it's the skeletons in sexual positions is pretty funny. Um,
yeah.
and I like that too. I don't know that it's a very satisfying episode. Um, I think what I mostly like it for is the sheer bitterness of the overall message that because of
Mm,
this alteration to the justice field, love is what killed everyone, and
yeah.
you're only able to escape if you're unethical. Um, I think that seems very right up Red Dwarf's alley.
I like, yeah, because I like the fact as well that there is a real, when you it's sort of shown at the very end, but there's a real pisser from the very beginning is the fact that they find there's an escape pod with two individuals, these two individuals that you sort of see the flashbacks about, and they communicate with them. They actually talk with them, and then when they uncover them from the ship, they have been turned to dust, much like the original Red Dwarf crew. And then when you find out why it is a real, like you say, it feels like a real Red Dwarf moment, is they have inverted this justice field. So as you say, sort of instead of moral acts being praised and unethical acts being punished, they've reversed it. So unethical acts now become praised and rewarded, and moral acts become punished. Um, so they escape. They leave everybody behind and they escape, which actually is an immoral act. So they actually do survive and they get rewarded with that to be maintained stasis. But when they come out of stasis to warn the Red Dwarf crew of not going on there, they are fried alive.
Yeah, I
um,
quite like that.
yeah, and I do like that, but I like it more because you've seen what sort of led to it. Because again,
Yeah,
it's sort of you find out that the relationship they're having is illicit. They are both married. That it's an affair that they are having, um,
that's what makes
and so
sex
it's
good,
sort of
right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's interesting. This it's interesting of how they sort of get to this point of sort of like um, this relationship they are having. It's clearly not the first time. They've met before. Um,
yeah.
and it's arranged. Like she's had a transfer to get there, and um, it feels like there's sort of this. When I go about this thing of consequence, that's where I kind of like this episode because you do get to see that this sort of thing, like when they do start meeting up, at one point like her hair is an absolute mess, and she's like, I went to the
Hmm.
salon and this is what's happened, and he's like, yeah, I
Hmm.
went to the dentist and I've lost a tooth, like and they can't ingest the food because it's that vile. And so she's like, well, look, I'm a computer scientist. Like, I could just for one night, like, I could reverse it. Um, and you don't get to see the debauchery. Like, they don't go that far. But it's sort of suggested when you see all the skeletons. I kind of like that sort of like that downward spiral of like what happened and why. Um,
No, I
and
agree
as you
with you.
say,
I like seeing that. Go ahead.
no, there's a funny comment because again, you say about the continuity and the references and things and paying off. You're right about this idea in samsara of like it's love that love or lust, I suppose, that sort of leads to this ship's destruction and all these deaths. But when you actually get to crisis later on, and the crew, Crichton and the crew actually get to communicate with the universe as an entity, which is a concept we'll get onto. And Crichton actually says in that thing, well, you have created love, and we know that's a positive thing. And I'm thinking back to
Ah.
you go back to samsara, and you're like, well, no, again, not always. But yeah, I do like this episode. I do like sort of the payoffs. I like some of the funny bits as well. Between it's silly stuff like the stuff between Lister and the cat. Some funny silly
Mm.
jokes in there.
No, I think the Lister Cat stuff is good. I mean, I guess that I feel like it's another variation for a lot of the episode on the sort of like luck field thing that we've seen
Mm.
a bunch of times, where obviously there's this whole thing with future Monopoly and rolling the dice, and then there's literally gambling, and so I mean, it's clear that that kind of thing is going on. Um, and then I sort of think like, I agree the flashbacks are good. I mean, I like this overall misanthropic point. Um, but then I wonder like, it's a nice callback to have piles of ash, but then why are
Mm.
everyone else skeletons?
Yeah, it's true. They've all been flash heated in the same way.
Right, and it
Yeah.
uses the term flash heated. And I don't know. I mean, I find myself, I think like, okay, well, it's a clever idea. Surely she understood what turning this into an injustice field would do, right?
Mm.
But then I also think like, I mean, I like seeing the skeletons in sexual positions, but then I have questions. you know,
Yeah.
First of all, um, you see a skeleton performing oral sex on another skeleton. It's very funny, but
Mm.
do you mean to tell me that like crew members said, "Bad luck is affecting me. The only way that we can guarantee we will stay alive is if I perform fellatio on you, comma
Yeah.
stranger." Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little strange, and then I'm a little disturbed by the idea that, um, especially because of the skeletons, less so because of the Green and Barker's love affair. The idea that sex is an immorality that is,
Mm.
rewarded by the machine.
Well, it's interesting because actually, at one part in the episode, um, Rimmer even points it out. He sort of says, "Well, how does that work? Because
Mm.
morality and everything changes from culture to culture and time to time. So, how does this work?" Sort of thing. Which is a good point because that we've also gone previously. We've also seen a hollow ship. Um, in which they have a sex deck where to have open relationships and sort of sexual congress with lots of people is part and parcel of a daily exercise routine. So not immoral. Um, so yeah, so it does. It sort of throws both in really. Um, it's interesting. I like the fact that say it does suggest that if you're going to be immoral, you go to your base, isn't it? That's sort of the thing because there's violence in there as well. People have been killed, and
Yeah.
it sort of suggests that immorality is more about the low, isn't it? The sort of your base emotions and base needs. That's where your immorality lies. But that feels like a very Christian, but a very sort of
Yeah.
yeah, maybe a draconian Christian, feeling, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, I think it's that I think you're right that that speech by um, uh, is it Crichton about the how the field is reprogrammed,
Mm.
or I'm not sure who. Um, but yeah, I mean, I do think that's one of the best elements of it. But yeah, you're right. There's a kind of like almost puritanical sort of overlay to this that I'm not sure that they were. I mean, this is not the kind of show that is known for its puritanism, right? I mean, I'm not sure that they were in control over that implication. And I think that speech kind of gets out of it, but still, it's not like they revisit that and say like, boy, there were a bunch of puritanical Christians who programmed this.
Yeah. Well, again, like I say, if you were on that ship, if you were in the samsara when this was all happening, especially if you're the captain, you must have been trained in this scenario. If there is a malfunction in which the what's it drive reverses, the morality drive reverses or whatever, or flips, here's the things to do. Even if it's a sort of you can go switch it off. Okay, well, how do I do that safely? Well, every 4 steps, just punch someone in the face. Or trip someone up, or do something, pour some hot coffee on someone, do whatever, do something horrible to someone, you will get to that drive safely and you can turn it off.
Yeah, I like the idea that if you're going to captain a ship, you have to be trained to like you have an assistant there who
Yeah.
is, say somebody who you is like you know underage or something terrible, and you have to like kiss them and fondle them all the way to the karma drive
Yeah.
to turn it
Yeah.
off. There's just like the sexual partner. Oh, we're drive has inverted. Gotta start groping this person, while we walk to fix it.
Yeah, it's there must have been some protocols to deal with this. It's again we're nitpicking. If they'd have stopped it, we wouldn't have the show. But um, it still feels like a thing of sort of like, why would you put something on a ship like this if you didn't know how to stop this from happening?
Yeah, no, and I don't know. I mean, why can it be reversed? I mean, I get that it can be reprogrammed. I mean, I think that's a good point. I think the relative morality point is well made. But, why would you build a justice field and have a reverse setting? I don't know.
Mm.
But I don't know. We're nitpicking. I mean, I don't think it's a bad episode. I
No,
like.
it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you say, the
It's very much.
flashbacks are add a lot. It's amazing how much, like those little flashbacks, even to Rimmer's childhood, or the Ace Rimmer, the beginning of Smoke Me a Kipper. It's amazing how much just a few scenes set outside of the normal characters or outside of the normal time can help an episode.
Yes, I agree. It gives it some context and a bit more with the characters, and I do like that. Okay, so we've talked about morality and that sort of thing, but let's get to sort of the next. So the next one, actually, we've also talked about time travel as well in this sort of within the first episode, and we're going to get a little bit more of that with Give and Take, which. You've sort of said you really enjoyed this episode. Well, this is sort of stand up to you. So, what were your thoughts on Give and Take?
Well, I mean, I love the robots.
Yeah.
There are two robots. There's Alcepius, who's the real doctor robot, and then there's Snacky, the snack dispensing robot who is mistaken, who sort of looks like very Robbie the robot, and Crichton defers to him. Basically, everything with those two robots is just a 9 or a 10 for me. I was telling a friend of mine about this episode, and I said, they encounter Alcepius, and he's a great design, and he threatens them, and they say, and he says, like, I see you are apprehensive, you think that I'm crazy, don't worry, I was, but I've been certified, and he points to the wall where he's written for himself, no longer insane in blood. And Snacky, Snacky listening as a psychiatrist, and Snacky being brought into the room to perform complex surgery, and only at that point saying, just out of curiosity, what do you do when a bunch of people think you're a state of the art medibot? I'm in love with Snacky, and I don't know. I think the whole thing with Lister's kidney, I like the resolution of it. I mean, he sort of he wakes up and he seems to be hungover for quite some time, and then this Alcepius has taken out his kidneys, so it's quite dramatic. You see him, this villain capture two of our main characters and begin to take their organs out. And then there's a shootout, which there have not been a lot of shootouts on Red Dwarf. Well, I mean, I guess you have the bazookoids, but I mean,
yeah. No, I was going to say, so I do agree with this episode. I mean, there's some fantastic touches as well with Snacky, like the fact he's got his name on the back of him. But I love the fact that they actually take effort to make sure he enters the room in the right way, so that you never see his back. And there's little bits like that are really good. With regard to Asclepius, the sort of the design of the robot, he's a medical droid there to make you feel better, but he is designed like some sort of crazed murder bot. Like he's terrifying, but
Yeah.
it's a great design. I agree, and I love that there's two moments in this, again, sort of very Rimmer-centric for me, that is he sort of deals with his own psychosis and neuroses by sort of talking himself around, and Snacky says nothing, and Rimmer comes to this conclusion of how he's got to look inside himself for his own hero and all this other stuff. And then when Snacky sort of acknowledges or admits that he's just a dispensing droid for snacks, and Rimmer's sort of like, but you helped me. He's like, no, I didn't. I didn't say anything. But you taught me to this. And he was like, no, I didn't. And he keeps having to repeat that. I didn't do anything. You reached that conclusion yourself. It's so funny. It is really well done. So the stuff with the robots is very, very good. And to see, because you see the organs as well in that, you see a couple of kidneys get blown up in this.
Yeah.
Let me just because again, let's think about it. The solution to this is the same as Ticket to Ride as well, isn't it? Let's be honest. So this is, it was curries before, it's kidneys now. But let me get this straight. So they go back in time. At the end of this, they use a device to go back in time, a status thing, so a brand new sort of time travel device, despite the fact they've actually got the Kronos device from the first episode. But they go back in time to the day before they find the space station with the Asclepius net on. They then take Lister's kidneys at that point, and give him the K chip, wherever it is in his blood, to act as a dialysis, which is why he feels like crap, why he feels like he's got a hangover. They then go through the scenario, and then when you get back to the future, they put in his kidneys again, so he feels better. So whose kidneys were in the jar that got blown up?
Yeah. I thought of that. Yeah, it can't be Lister's. I like that it's a closed time loop. And I think it is a closed time loop. I think that obviously, the reason why he was sick was because his kidneys had been taken out. He was functioning somehow without kidneys, through the whole show. And presumably, we never actually see Alcepius take the kidneys out. You sort of see them in a jar. We have to believe those weren't actually his kidneys, and that when he is taken back to Red Dwarf and he's given a medical examination, they say, well, bad news, the droid took your kidneys because we've now noticed they were missing. That's how I understood it. But you're quite right. If those really are his kidneys, it doesn't work, right?
No.
But then it occurred to me, of course, if they examine him, they're going to say, your kidneys are missing. Clearly, the droid took them out. But actually, they're in a jar, in the foreground. They don't, the jar, the water in the jar isn't filled with blood, like they were just taken out or something.
They could be somebody else. They could have been pickled, and it could have been somebody else's and stuff. But it just sort of, in this point, I was just like you say, it's a closed loop, and I prefer it when they do have these closed loops of time. Doesn't fit with the time travel they had of Twentica, but we're going to ignore that. But I do like this episode. I also like some of the stuff with Kat as well.
Yes.
Yes. When the total and complete acknowledgement of his narcissism and selfishness. When he's not gonna, they're saying to Lister, look, we can do a DNA rewriting of this, so he could be a donor. And he's like, and Lister's like, yeah, but he's not going to. He won't do that. And again, this goes back to a very early episode, right at the beginning. When we had was it? No, it was a confidence and paranoia. When Lister's suffering from sort of space pneumonia, whether it's space flu, and he's having those hallucinations, and Rimmer runs in, and so the cat is like, look, Lister, the monkey, he's ill, and he's like, oh, that's really sad. I'm having lunch. it's still that thing of, he's still going to, like, you are my bud, but I'm not going to give you my kidney. I like all that stuff and how they trick him into it. Um,
Yeah, the tricking is very good. The Crichton tells
yeah,
Cat he's made a mistake, and it's Cat
yeah,
who needs the kidney. So instantly, Cat goes to Lister and
yeah.
butters him up and says, I would do it for you, buddy. I've thought about it. I'm gonna do this for you. I know you do it for me. And he says,
Yeah.
hey, go in there, take my kidney. While you're in there, if you take a shine to anything else, just take that too. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And going back to the idea of the creepiness of Crichton doing the sort of surgery and stuff on Mr. And Lister, the speed with which he sort of sedates the cat, like that's a well practiced move.
Yeah, but he is it this episode where he also has the laser scalpel that he waves around the room and burns everything, or is that a different one?
No, there's a different one, but yeah, like you say, Crichton and medical tech. I think that might be Crisis, but yeah,
Oh,
Crichton and
yeah.
medical tech don't sort of combine for me. But yeah, I do. I think this is, we've sort of referred to The Simpsons and being able to access. This is one of those perfect closed episodes. You could sort of just jump into this one and enjoy it. Like, you don't need to know a great deal of what else is going on. It just sort of works. And yeah, I do really like Snacky. I think it's a good.
Oh, yeah.
As you said, sort of Robbie the robot. I love the fact that Crichton, they sort of say, he's Crichton's he's much more advanced than me. He's hugely advanced, and Lister's like, but he's only got 4 buttons.
Yeah.
And Crichton's like, exactly, as if that's sort of evidence of how efficient he is.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a very good episode.
No, I really like that. And the other thing we haven't mentioned is that the episode sort of starts with not only is Lister drunk, but then Rimmer has this argument with the lift, with the AI running the lift. And you think, okay, he's threatening the lift with being replaced. He says he's going to interview new lifts, and you think,
Yeah.
okay, this is funny, this is amusing, but this is like, it's not amazing. But then by the end, you've gone back in time, and of course, you're right. How many time travel devices do they have access to at this point? But they go back in time, and you see them kidnap this Lister, and take his kidneys and replace him, and they're trying not to be seen. And then you see the same events from them hiding inside the lift as Rimmer is arguing with the lift, which is there. The lift can open it. And, your characters are inside the lift trying to convince the lift not to open for Rimmer. So, there's something I find kind of iteration very fun. And there's something very fun about seeing the same episode or the same bit done from another point of view. And you think, oh, that was a pretty good bit the first time through. But now it's like, a pretty good bit squared.
Yes. Yeah. And I like the fact that it has further payoff as well. It's not just left there. Because Rimmer sort of says to the lift, because when he's being threatened, he's like, "Oh, you'll be demoted to becoming a service lift somewhere." But in the lift, future Rimmer sort of saying, "Well, ignore him. He's an idiot. My past self was an idiot. If you do as we say, I will get you promoted, and you'll become. You'll get done to the officers' mess, where you'll get to go up and down in that glass elevator shaft." And he's like, "Oh, okay," and that's what sort of sells him. And then the very end of the episode is obviously it comes back to that, and Rimmer hasn't got round to it. And he's like, "Oh yeah, well, must have slipped my mind. Yeah, have some. Yeah, I'm so sorry." Clearly doesn't care, and you find out that Snacky, who is now sort of like also grown and known new things, has actually attached a basically a nuclear accelerator to the lift, and the lift will get his revenge.
Yeah.
So
It's a
I do like that.
nice little close to the episode.
Yeah.
But I do like how Snacky, having insisted he's just a snack dispenser over and over. becomes so arrogant that he's been convinced he's an engineer.
Yeah. Yeah, 'cause he changed him. Says, "I'm no longer a I'm a stasis booth engineer." Um, yes. So give and take is better than anything that came out of Series 10, and I find that sort of I enjoyed Twentica. I got issues with some of it, but I enjoyed some. But give and take is definitely again they're sort of getting there. They're really hitting their stride with the series.
Yeah.
So what do you think of Officer Rimmer?
Not as good. I don't think that it's, I mean, I was quite taken with Give and Take. With Officer Rimmer, I like it, but, I like the bioprint device as much as I do anything with Rimmer. Like the Rimmer stuff, is amusing, but then, I don't know. I mean, you have to believe, you have to believe not only that you can like wall off entire parts of the ship. I do quite like the combination of multiple rimmers into this monster. That's
Yeah.
quite fun and unique. But we were talking earlier about how it doesn't really make sense that they respect rank anymore. This is an episode that I think is mostly an inferior version of Rimworld, despite liking that monster, and the bioprints I love. But this is an episode that utterly depends on rank and the privileges of rank in creating basically, a class system based on rank, which, why would anyone listen to him?
Yeah, and the other thing is, well, like, who's built this stuff? I mean, he's still got the scutters around, and he's obviously, he's hard light and stuff, and he has got the scutters doing things, but like, this is the kind of episode that you need a Holly level computer to enforce it. Otherwise, that as they do later on with the officers' mess, they just walk in and carry on. So there are some. I say I do really like the idea of the bioprint. I love the notion that these people, they're not in stasis. It just prints off crew when it needs them.
Mm-hmm.
They have to fulfill their mission, and then they just dissolve, as it were.
It's a little
And I
like
think that's a great idea.
like Mr. Meeseeks in Rick and Morty.
Yes, yeah. I also quite like the fact there's a printer jam, and so sort of his face has been extended, sort of like as a bad print.
Well, those special effects are wonderful with a messed up commanding officer of the Nautilus.
Yeah.
I just think that it looks fantastic.
It is. It's really creepy at times, isn't it? But yeah, it's it's typical Rimmer. It's a Rimmer centric episode, but it's not a great Rimmer centric episode. I mean, there's good bits in it, like there's some analogies about he basically gets promoted by accident.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of that I like that. That's sort of quite good. But then and also his comment around to Crichton when Crichton's sort of like well, do you not feel that because you've got here through deceit and deception, do you not feel that it takes the shine off it? And he's like, well, it's not about how it's about getting there, not about how you get there. He's like, it's like last night I made love to a beautiful woman. Did I get there by bike or bus? Nobody cares. It's that's not the point. And I like that. That feels very Rimmer.
I agree.
And up until that point, all that stuff I find quite good, and I like the initial things like the lift having the officers lift and the grunts lift and that sort of thing. That all feels good, but then when it starts to escalate, as you say, the sort of all the Rimmers, it feels a little. It starts to sort of not fall apart, but it's not as good.
Right.
No, I agree. There are a little bits. I kind of like the Rimmer Quartet.
Yeah.
That's quite funny. And the Rimmer monster at the end, is very much the thing, isn't it? Sort of like a combination of body parts and stuff. But again, this episode sort of seems to just end very abruptly, doesn't it?
Yes.
Which I find a little disappointing.
Yeah. They just, the Rimmer monster writes a to-do list, as our Rimmer sneaks past, and they fire on the Rimmer monster. Cue, you don't even see it explode. Just cue credits.
Yeah, and it's one of those where I thought maybe I'd skipped it or something. I literally went back and I checked. I was like, oh no, that's the end of the episode. How very bizarre. Um, it's quite a weirdly unsatisfying ending, but the monster's good. Like you say, the monster's really
Hmm.
cool. Um, and I say this. It's this thing of like the different versions of technology for deep space travel that seem to have been invented for.
Hmm.
What why haven't they come across more things with people still on them? Um, but also, I really like the idea that Lister has sold his genome,
Oh yeah, yeah,
um, and that's an interesting idea. Um, but then, does it feed back into Dear Dave? This
right.
idea of actually
I thought about
you,
that.
you've had a whole bunch of views all over the place doing different jobs. Granted, it sounds like pretty crappy jobs, but call center people and that sort of thing. Um, it's yeah, I just found that quite an interesting idea that sort of someone could copyright his genome so they could be produced and licensed off as they needed them.
Yeah, I do too. And there's a kind of like, well, there's a kind of like existential hell of like knowing there are tens of thousands of you out there,
Mm,
living miserable lives waiting to die upon completion of your call center duties. I mean, I thought
yeah.
about Lister being on hold through that whole episode. Was there a copy of himself on the other end? Um,
Oh, that would have been good, wouldn't it? Yes.
and I
Yeah.
mean, I think it would have been better to sort of have a callback there. You know, I don't know. I mean, but there's a sort of like existential hell of imagining copies of yourself by the tens of thousands because it's thousand companies or so have licensed his genome. So
Yeah.
there must be tens of thousands of him out there, or who lived at one point only to die terribly. And while those aren't you, right? You shouldn't feel something about that. How do you not? you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting idea that they've obviously introduced. They don't really do a great deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's another nice little idea that they drop into an otherwise average-ish episode.
Yeah,
Um,
I do love that speech of sort of how he's gotten here out of deceit.
mm,
But you pointed out how this would need a lot of work to do to construct this, beyond the scutters. And I also find myself wondering, like, if you're capable of constructing like an officer's mess and all of these luxuries, right? Like, where does the leather furniture on the lift come from? The
yeah.
officer's corridor, while amusing, looks like something out of the good ship on Angels and Demons.
Mm,
And so again, there's this kind of like trope on Red Dwarf of like the utopia is brightly lit, and clean. Um,
yeah.
well, if you can make that, why haven't you made that already? Right?
Yeah. Why haven't yeah? Why not? If Rimmer is so bothered by that, why not just make the whole ship like that,
Sure.
or your living quarters? Yeah, I agree. Um, yeah, it's an interesting one. It's to be fair, like this is the thing again. Like usually, sort of like Rimmer usually gets a comeuppance in some way of what he is doing. Obviously backfires, and there is that. Like the bio printer sort of like backfires, but his plan doesn't fail, and that's what sort of is disappointing. Like if he had been patient and hadn't
Hmm.
kicked the printer or done whatever, it's like his plan was working pretty well.
Well, that's a good point
um,
because in Rimmer world, the whole point is he cannot live with himself, right?
mm,
Rimmer, we've seen that idea again and again that Rimmer hates himself in one form
yeah,
or another. And that's one problem that I had with like the barbershop quartet. Like, it's fun to see, but then I wonder, like, would Rimmer be happy as part of a four Rimmer barbershop quartet singing for other people who outrank him?
mm,
Um, and so it gets back to sort of like what you were saying, that his plan works this time, but we've already established that he can't stand himself. he's certainly
Yeah.
not going to be happy, being subordinate to himself. You know.
Again, like I say, a better end. I like the monster, and if they'd have contracted some of the stuff with the captain from the Nautilus, I don't know, or maybe even included him a bit more. A better ending to this, to me, would have been all those others in some form doing like mutinying,
Mm-hmm. Right.
or at least dividing up into factions over specific things, like, because that's more than likely what would have happened, as they all become so sort of backstabbing and deceitful, is sort of like trying to keep turning on each other. Yeah,
Civil
it
War
feels,
on the Red Dwarf.
yeah, yeah, because it feels like the monster's great, and I like that they say it always has a pen and produces multiple pens, but like I say, Rimmer doesn't get his comeuppance in this episode, like he should do really for this plan. Which is a little unsatisfying based on what we've seen before. Everything from, let's say, from Me Squared to Rimmerworld. We know really that those Rimmers should have done something gittish within, by the time the episode's ended.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, but now we get on to, I think what we've both said is possibly our favourite episode of this series, Crisis. Crichton suffering from a midlife crisis. So what do you like about this episode? What are your thoughts on this episode?
One of the things I think is I love this episode. I mean, I think it's wonderful. One of the things that I find so interesting about this episode is that it starts with a really simple premise, and it kind of has a 3-act structure. So it starts with the premise that Crichton is having a midlife crisis, right? He's all but says, what's it all about, Alfie? He's even doubting Silicon Heaven, which is a nice little callback. So then in Act 2, they go to a Nova 3 and they meet another Crichton, and this is part of Lister's plan to, prove to him that he's evolved through Lister's guidance. So, you sort of have all the midlife crisis jokes in Act 1, and, it's a simple premise. I mean, so far, it's a good episode. Then you introduce Butler, this and the Ace Rimmer, to Crichton, who's unbelievably successful, unbelievably sophisticated, so much fun, so much fun. And then Butler abruptly leaves, and so at this point, I'm totally sold on the episode. And then I'm like, why is Butler leaving? I want more Butler. And then the ship has trouble and it's crashing, and it lands on the great observation station, and speaks. This is the idea earlier that Butler's people were searching for a sentient universe, and while they're on the station, the universe is on hold, and they speak to the universe, which is so surreal and bizarre. It seems like something very much out of Hitchhiker's Guide.
Exactly what I thought. Yeah.
And I thought this just takes a left turn and another left turn, and I like each segment better than the last. And for me to end the segment and think, why are you doing this, and then be happy and surprised by what they're doing is such a rarity. So I mean, I just think it's fun and surreal and wonderful. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I think, if anything, this felt to me like it should have been like the series end. Like this should have been the last episode. I mean, you end a series by acknowledging a sentient universe, don't you? That's sort of a big reveal.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is a really good episode. I like the fact that you say this, because again, to acknowledge actually not just the idea that Crichton is having a midlife crisis, but the fact that the actors are all aging. They're all in their sort of late 40s and 50s now. So, to acknowledge that actually by having this idea of the midlife crisis is quite good. I think it's quite clever, and to give it to Crichton especially, I really enjoy. You know, just this it's the silliest thing, but the fact he changes his bodywork for a red sort of Ferrari red body thing that sort of, you know, it can what does he say? It can do sort of like 16 miles an hour or something, and does those stuff. He's got like
Right.
his circular panel in the middle has now got sort of like lightning bits coming off it, and that, like, it's all very it's very funny to me. I mean, it's silly, but it's very fun. I enjoy seeing sort of you know, this, and Robert Llewellyn's very good.
Oh yeah.
But you're right. The introduction of Butler, and I like the fact that this introduces other little bits and pieces for all of them. You know, we learn that Rimmer has got a list of the people that did less well than him
Yeah,
from
right.
school, and you're thinking like, well, that's just vile, but so typical. And then you also find out that Lister had a midlife crisis for all of 5 minutes, and the little touches like that are really good. I like those things. And again, like I say, when we get to meet Butler, and again, it's just gut punch after gut punch for Crichton. You know, and there's two sections. There's two jokes that just sort of hit home. Is you know, he sort of says about they go in, and he's already said about writing some music and this thing, and then Crichton refers to the floor, and he's sort of, are you using this kind of you know, floor polish? And he's sort of like, I really don't know. It's been a while, sort of thing. Just to be put down, sort of like, and to be sort of, you know, almost cast aside of like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And see, Crichton's face though is so well, it's just so good. And then, like I said, the next ones is when he sort of like he says, Crichton says to me, "So I haven't had much time. I've been spending it on my latest novel." And he says, "Oh, reading." He says, "Writing," and it's just, again, just the reaction. It's just spot on. That the comedy timing it's just the banter.
Oh yeah.
And whoever plays Butler, I'm going to sort of, you need to call out, but is so well, you know, so well cast. He does a really good job, and it's okay. It's a guy called Dominic Coleman, who I reckon, again, another actor I've seen in a number of things. So yeah,
He felt
does a
familiar to
great
me
job.
watching it. I thought I have to know this guy.
He's another British comedy actor I've seen in a whole number of things. But yeah, I just think, you know, there's so many little pieces. He's so good.
Well,
and
the novel is, you know, I mean, it's so perfect. The novel is about the lunar droid uprising told through 5 aristocratic human families. You know, it's, you know, so War and Peace. You know, so sophisticated, so upscale, so snooty. You know, it's just one, like you said, another gut punch, the wrenching up of Crichton's agony.
Yeah.
What was the other example?
Just the one where sort of Crichton tries to sort of have that one little thing up on him where he knows the floor cleaning product that he may have used,
Yeah,
and he just sort of dismisses it, and I'm just sort of like, the look on Crichton's face, because that's clearly so important to him, is very good. It's very funny. And then I say it goes through, doesn't it? So all through sort of into the ship, like he improves the efficiency of the ship and all this other stuff. But also the fact of like, it's such daft bits when they meet the Gelfs on the ship, and he knows them again, like, you know, they're in this sector of space, and he's I'm so and so's godfather, and you're just like, oh my god, this is
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, it gets more. It is, yeah. It's I feel for, like, it's
I
funny,
gave them medical help. I saved this life. You know, First of all, you know them. Secondly, they revere you because you are such a medical genius. You've saved their life. And then the pronunciation lessons in the Gelf
language. That's what I was going to say. Yeah. And the fact they're all trying to do it, and sort of Crichton he just feels and clearly feels so small and so beaten by this. But it's funny. It's so funny. But I do feel awkward. I feel incredibly uncomfortable for Crichton. And this episode in particular, sort of like, it's quite grand. I mean, the bit where they go to speak to the universe looks really good. But but this feels like I would say this feels like a classic episode.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is probably the height of what they've done. Since Back to Earth, they haven't reached this good. This is when they sort of they're really hitting something with this one.
Oh, I agree
And
completely. But this is also a Simpsons episode, right? I mean, or American Dad episode or whatever, where it just takes a left turn, takes another left turn, but yet, I mean, that shouldn't work, right? But it works, and each of those segments flows logically from the one before it, and even like instead of trying to have all of these different plots that somehow are woven together and they all kind of don't quite mesh. Here, the universe is halfway through its life cycle, so the universe is going through a midlife crisis, and all of the arguments that that Crichton brought up to himself at the beginning are repeated to the universe, and the universe is thrown into existential despair. Oh,
yeah,
that's so charming. So
yeah.
it's woven together, but so effortlessly.
Yeah, this episode feels confident. I think in there's been past episodes. I think we said about series 10 felt a little bit shaky, and I think they were trying to call back to make people feel more comfortable. I think there was a sort of a lack of confidence in those episodes. That the charm and the confidence to be able to do this kind of crazy stuff is definitely come back for this series. And I totally agree with what you said. Like the feel of sort of the Douglas Adams, the sort of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I feel in this episode. So much. But yeah, it's a crack. Yeah, it's a really really strong episode.
Absolutely. And you mentioned in the previous episode the poor conclusion was sort of like you're left, the shooting of the four rimmer monster.
Mm.
So at the end of all of this, then you have, the Crichton calling Butler, to we found that space station you're looking for after you sabotage the ship. And then just as it's just a gag, but the final, gut punch, the final gag is that even this has been stripped from Crichton, and
Yeah,
Butler intentionally sabotaged the ship so they could all meet the universe, whom he knows very well.
and calls uni.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when they do that, and again, like I say, these little epilogues. A bit like I think with Samsara, that thing with the lift, like when they pay them off.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sort of like it's a final flourish. It's a show of confidence in what they've done, and it's a perfect finish to this episode because he's just sort of all the stuff I think we've sort of said before, sort of like his pomposity, his ability to lie, all these other things that he's so actually incredibly proud of.
Right.
He's showing them here like he wants to one up. Like it shouldn't really matter to him. He's a bloody mechanoid, but the desire to show up and have one-upmanship on Butler is so sort of tangible with Crichton. Like you can feel it as I've got one thing. I've got to have one thing. So yeah, no, it's excellent. I am quite. It's kind of sad that this isn't the last episode of the series. So I think if that was the final episode, I think it'd have been a real excellent send off. But we end with Can of Worms, which is a cat-centric episode, which you haven't really had very many of, and is a polymorph revisit. And again, is a bit of a mishmash, really. This episode,
Yeah.
It sort of it introduces an interesting concept of the fact that, like, if the cat, obviously, we're in an all male crew, and the cat was abandoned by the cat species, so he actually technically is he a virgin? And this obviously episode answers that. But I don't know. It feels where I think you sort of got some sort of you start to reach some cleverness and some sort of I won't say sophistication in some of the jokes. This one starts to feel a bit puerile and a bit sort of silly and a bit throwaway.
Yeah.
compared to this. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. I mean, I think that I still like this episode better than others in the season. I mean, I like this episode
Mm.
personally better than Twanica, for example. Uh,
Mm.
and I am, this might be my favorite of the polymorph episodes. I don't know. You know, I'm maybe a little less enamored by the first one than others, and than you. But I mean, yeah, I agree. It's not great. I guess I
Mm.
like that it's a cat episode. Um,
Mm.
I like his going through pregnancy. As the egg. I don't really care whether he's a virgin. Although it's interesting, why does he brag about this and have all these sexual moves if there's no female around? Um, but there are some payoffs for that. I mean, he's going to help them, help the eggs, and then he just absurdly shifts back, and kills them all. But I mean, it's fun watching Cat along the way. um, I think maybe the best moment is Cat having been impregnated with a bunch of eggs. Is that they go to him to warn him, and he refuses to listen. To it, and he says that she really had some moves, like shooting a pipe. And then her antennae popped out.
Yeah.
Say, women don't have egg depositors. And he says maybe they don't for you.
Yeah. I do that, recounting his sort of sexual exploits, and he does the moment he sort of says, "Yeah, all you've got to do is blow on her on her tentacles," and everyone else is just sort of looking at him like, "What?" um, yeah, it's. I also like some of the other ideas in this that are quite funny, like the polymorph babies or young have a defense mechanism of making themselves as incredibly cute as possible. And some of the things that sort of been listed of, and you actually get to see like a hedgehog in a little mini shopping trolley and all these other things.
Yeah.
It's sort of like weirdly absurd, like a little mini sort of like little pig and all these other things
with
to
with
protect
a blue
themselves.
bow on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's some good ideas in it. And again, sort of the idea of the polymorph sort of life cycle and stuff being explored is quite interesting. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
no,
also like Cat giving birth. Speaking of the cute little polymorphs, as he gives birth, and you see like a toy boat pop out from behind him, and they wrestle with it and throw it down. The first one is chomping plastic teeth, and,
yes,
and then they throw it in a box, and they all keep shifting into other objects in the box. I thought that was quite fun.
yeah. So let's say it has its moments, and the bit where they're hunting them down in the sort of the cargo bays or whatever it is,
With a
it's
Mexican
reminiscent of.
standoff.
Yeah, to me, it was a sort of. It made me think of like The Thing, sort of
Mm-hmm.
when they're all sort of paranoid of which one of you could be the creature. Um, Again, it's fine, but yeah, it's a weird ending because they get to meet other versions of themselves, so they're all in the lift, and when the lift opens, Cat steps in basically with two guns and shoots one set of of them, and the sort of the end line is sort of like, how did you know which ones were us? And so, well, Mama always knows it's babies. And you're like, yeah,
Yeah,
but you just protected them all, so
exactly.
and so it does feel a bit odd.
No, I agree. It's
I mean,
kind of like,
it looks kind of cool, and Danny John Jules is great, so I'm happy to see it. But yeah, it doesn't really work for me.
yeah, I agree. It's kind of like we just want, we've gone as far as we can go. Because they're going down to the, to be X-rayed, to find
Mm.
out who's real and who's not. And it just feels as if, yeah, forget that. That wouldn't be interesting. We need to wrap up the episode. We've gone as far as we can go.
Yeah, yeah. Um, This episode feels a bit more in line with probably the start of the series, or even to me, sort of like more akin to season 10 than some of the stuff we've had from season 11. So it's
Yeah.
okay, it's fine, but when you're following up sort of like Give and Take and Crisis, it's a bit of a letdown for the end of the series.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, we're of absolutely like minds on this and on those two, really excellent episodes.
Okay, so there we have traversed 3 sort of seasons this episode. So we've done Back to Earth, episodes 1 through 3, series 10 and series 11. Any final thoughts, Julian, on any of those before we sort of wrap up?
Well, I mean, the only thing I'll say is that if anyone thinks that Red Dwarf stopped at, season 5 or season 6 or 8 or what have you, forget it. There's good stuff here. And, Crisis is as good as, just about any classic episode. Give and Take is on that list. Season 11 has 2 classic episodes, which, you just have to see. So I think that, look, shows as they go on, can tend to repeat themselves and not feel quite as new. Here, seasons 9 and 10 kind of had to reestablish themselves. But I think it is impressive for a show this far in, especially when some of these newer seasons are seen as not the real Red Dwarf by some fans, to be firing at this average. Or more importantly, to still have amazing, wonderful episodes. What about you?
No, I'd agree. It's one of those sort of like, watching this back, there are the classics, as we say, the ones that I sort of go back to, and I admit sort of felt trepidation for series 10 and stuff, and we have sort of feelings around, especially the sort of the second half and later part of Back to Earth. But there's still some good in these. Like, season 10 I think lacks a bit of confidence and a bit of flair, but it's got some good bits. It makes me laugh. There's some chuckles to have there. But the average in the highs and the sort of the average hit rate for series 11 is so much better. Like that, to save that for the show that not only is it series 11, it's not 11 years. This is what we're looking at, almost 30 years, really. We're getting up to that sort of like, 25 to 30 years after it started, and they're still pulling some good stuff out there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think that, it's when it hits its stride and they make it relevant to the age of the characters or the character types or whatever, like, it really works. And so I think, yeah, I look forward to sort of getting into the next couple. Well, the last full series at this point, as of the sort of recording this show, is the next one is series 12, and then beyond that is the sort of the feature length episode, Promised Land. So we're going to be covering those in the next time we get together, next sort of episode. And also what we're going to be doing is, for at least the sort of 12, I think might be difficult to do Back to Earth because it's obviously three episodes and a very continuous story.
Well, we can do
but
it.
For at least
we'd both like number 1 the best, right?
That's true. That would be quite an easy one, really, wouldn't it? What we will do is we'll be sort of listing out our favourite episodes for each of the series as well. So we're going out, but we're getting to the end. This has been a hell of a journey, and we are coming to the end soon of this Red Dwarf retrospective.
It has taken us 3 million years.
In some cases it's felt like it. But yeah, it's been fantastic, and if you are enjoying this, we're coming to the end. But if you've enjoyed this, reach out, let us know if you agree with our thoughts or disagree with our thoughts. What are your favourite episodes? Let us know what you think are your favourite episodes, or if anything we sort of maybe have misrepresented, or you have thoughts on Back to Earth or the later sort of Dave series. Contact us through Twitter @PodTimeSpace, and have a chat. Okay. Julian, as always, it's been an absolute blast talking about this.
Absolutely.
I'm really enjoying it. But the other thing as well, just a bit of a note, you know, that last couple of episodes, we'll probably have to split them up because these are getting long. But that season 2 is looming on the horizon, is sort of there. We'll be starting on season 2. So we'll reiterate all the films we've got coming up in season 2 in the next episode as well.
It's going to be
so
great.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm looking forward to some goodies on there. But thank you very much, Julian. And we will catch up again soon.
Awesome, Scott.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.